I think we should start with NATO because NATO is the key. It was the key event that took place or perhaps didn't take place. But in order to understand that, we need to understand the context in which that summit meeting, the NATO summit meeting has taken place. And what is clear to me, what is absolutely clear to me, is that events have not shaped out as the NATO leadership, as the Western leadership had anticipated, and then in a position different from the one that they expected to be in at the end of February. Now, I'm not saying that off the top of my head. I've actually read articles in the Financial Times and in Reuters and in other places which say as much. The assumption was, as we've discussed many times in various programs and as we discussed at the time, that when they rolled out the sanctions against the Russian central bank, that would precipitate a massive economic crisis in Russia, that there would be enormous pressure on the Kremlin, that the military operation would be scaled down, and there would be a political crisis causing Putin to leave. It hasn't turned out that way. Things have proved quite otherwise. The ruble continues to strengthen. It's now, I think, at its strongest point since January. The Russian economy looks stable. It's clearly going to face a serious recession. But the Russian Prime Minister, Mishustin, gave an address to the Russian government in which he said that there would be a period of stress within the economy of about six months to a year, and then all the various import substitution programs, the turnaround in the consumer goods production, all of those things would start to kick in. So there isn't that economic crash in Russia. There isn't that total economic breakdown that they expected. Also, despite all the propaganda we've been hearing, the military situation on the ground is turning increasingly bad from their point of view. Earlier today, I got a report that Mariupol is now 98% under Russian control. Ukrainians are bottled up in two factories, basically, the Azovstal works and the Ilich works, and both of them are being stormed. In addition, there's been this extremely serious advance by the Russians from south, from Izium towards Kramatorsk, which is now clearly becoming the center, if you like, of the pocket, the Ukrainian pocket. The Ukrainian forces seem to be gradually consolidating there. And I have to say, it increasingly looks like they're going to make their last stand there, at least the forces, I should stress, in Donbass. And in the meantime, it's clear that Ukraine has run out of fuel for its military and is running out of armoured vehicles. Now, the Russians claim that they've destroyed 2,000 out of Ukraine's pre-war armoured vehicle fleet of 2,500. So you're starting to see Ukrainian troops moving around the country. They're short of fuel, they're short of armoured vehicles. They're having to do this in civilian vehicles instead. So we have an economic situation which is different from the one that they expected themselves to be in. There's a military situation which is different from the one they expected to be in, because they didn't expect that the war would continue in this kind of way. And of course, on top of that, there's increasing concerns about the economic damage to the West, especially to Europe. There was another article in the Financial Times which straightforwardly admitted that there is no substitute. Europe does not have any alternative to Russian gas. And, all that we've been hearing about liquefied natural gas, about more gas from Algeria and more gas from Norway and more gas from Azerbaijan has no reality behind it. So this article was talking quite straightforwardly about the fact that, big industrial factories in Germany will have to shut in the winter in order to make sure that German households continue to be fed with energy if things continue as they are, which they won't, by the way. But anyway, all of this is going on. So they are now in a very difficult position. So what do? they are now talking about sending heavy weapons to Ukraine, something which they'd previously said they wouldn't do. They've sent up to now anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft weapons. But now they're for the first time talking about sending infantry fighting vehicles, tanks, those sort of things. The trouble is, they've been doing this with Ukraine, it turns out, for years. Now, this is something I hadn't appreciated, but it seems that steadily over the last 8 years, all the Ukrainian losses that took place in 2014 have been made up with arms deliveries from Eastern Europe. And, of course, there have been more stepped up arms deliveries from Eastern Europe since the start of this particular war. So the East European states are saying we're running out. We don't have enough tanks. We don't have infantry fighting vehicles and anything like the numbers that are needed to make up the difference. So now the Western powers are becoming confronted with a dilemma, which I don't think they ever wanted to be in, which is, do they let the situation play out, which would be politically disastrous for them, or do they find some kind of way of escalating by sending Western heavy weapons to Ukraine? So we now have this furious row in Germany about whether or not to send to Ukraine these 100 old Marder infantry fighting vehicles. The Greens, who are massively invested now politically in supporting Ukraine, I mean, if this doesn't turn out well for the Greens, then there's a very good chance we will never see the Greens in government in Germany ever again. So the Greens want to send these weapons. Scholz at the moment is extremely unhappy about doing so. I suspect he's being told increasingly by people within the SPD and probably the Free Democrats and other people within the German establishment, you've taken leave of your senses. But of course, he's weak. He's always backed down whenever he's faced with Baerbock and Habeck. He's always gone along with whatever demands they've made. And of course, the real risk is that we are going to start to see heavy weapons, Western heavy weapons, being sent to Ukraine. The problem is, yet again, and I go back to what the Financial Times was saying, there aren't that many of them. The stocks have been heavily run down since the end of the Cold War. So the other thing is, you can send German infantry fighting vehicles and British infantry fighting vehicles, but the risk you run is that they're going to be sent in penny packets, that the Russians control the skies over Ukraine. They have these enormously powerful hypersonic missiles. They can destroy them on the ground. So that then leads you, if you're going to go on escalating, to the next possibility. And then we start to get talk about, we may end up in a few weeks' time hearing more about no-fly zones, those kind of things. But that's the ladder of escalation we're on. The economic war is going badly. The military battle in Donbass is going badly. So we can't face the humiliation of complete defeat, especially by the autumn-winter period. So do we send Western weapons to Ukraine? And if we do, where do we stop? Or do we stop? Do we just go on escalating until we end up in a hot war with the Russians? And I'm afraid we're in a very dangerous situation now, because it's clear to me that there are people in the United States who, rather than face that kind of scenario of seeing everything fail, would go for a hot war with the Russians. And we see that people like Baerbock and Habeck and others find themselves in the same position in Germany.
Yeah, the statement that you made about autumn and winter, I think, is the key.
Yeah.
And I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking, and a lot of people may be frustrated with, is what exactly are the timelines and what exactly is the goal? Because no one really knows. And, you know, I understand the Russian military and the Kremlin has to keep things quiet and keep it played close to their chest. But my sense is that the longer this war goes, the more of a chance you're going to have for no-fly zones to get implemented and for the collective West to reach that top level of escalation, or, well, the top level would be obviously a hot war and, God forbid, nuclear, but to get to that no-fly zone level of that escalator, the longer this drags out. And I hear autumn and winter, and I understand that the Russians may be prepared to fight this war till the autumn or winter, and even the Russian public has said as much in the latest polls. But that allowing that much time to pass in order to achieve this very interesting and general goal of demilitarization and denazification means that we are running a very, very likely risk that we're going to get to this escalator. And then I listen to what you're saying with bringing in heavy weapons, and everyone is always asking, well, how do they get them in? How are they getting them in? Through Poland? Is Russia just letting them come in? Why aren't they doing anything in the West? Why aren't they using their technology, their hypersonic missiles, in order to prevent these weapons from coming in, or sending a message to the collective West? Don't you dare. Yes. I am getting reports that the Russians are now finally starting to take out roads and railway lines from west to east. But there's just so many questions. The big concern is, as this drags on, you run these risks. Listen to this quote from Macron. Quote, "The conflict, unfortunately, will not end soon. I think we will see a very difficult situation in Donbass in the coming days and weeks." This is exactly what Nuland and Sullivan and the neocons in D.C. want. They want a war that will drag on till the autumn or the winter. And it seems like, I mean, I don't know, but is this what Putin and the Russian generals are also looking at? And it seems like they may be playing into their hands, the neocons' hands. I'm not sure. We don't know, but I'm just speculating.
No. I actually interpreted Macron's words differently. In fact, I interpreted Macron's words to mean that he expects Ukraine to be defeated in Donbass, when he says that we're going to have a very difficult situation in the next few weeks in Donbass. I think what he means by a very difficult situation is that he's getting intelligence that the war in Donbass is going badly for Ukraine. That's how I see it. Now, having said that, you're absolutely right. The longer this goes on, the greater the risk of escalation. Now, the problem is not that this is what the neocons want. It's not what the neocons originally wanted. They thought in February that they would achieve what they wanted through shock and awe. And again, I want to stress, I'm not saying this off the top of my head. It's what I've been reading in places like the Financial Times. So, problem is with the neocons is that these people have no reverse gear. They will escalate. Now, I don't know whether the Russians themselves understand this. I don't know to what extent the Russians understand that, yes, the longer the war goes on, the more Ukraine gets ground down, the more it's dismantled piece by piece, the more the Ukrainian army is dismantled piece by piece, the stronger Russia economically becomes. All of those things are true from a Russian point of view. But when you are dealing with people like the neocons, doing that invites terrible dangers because, of course, they will never accept the kind of defeat that you're preparing for them. And, of course, they have the media behind them. I mean, if you look at the media in the West, I mean, they're absolutely, especially in the United States and in Germany, even to a lesser extent, in fact, in Britain. But, I mean, they exist in Britain too. But the media are taking the most extreme positions. And, of course, they support escalation, which is what the neocons are looking for. So I'm afraid that if there is a Ukrainian military disaster over the next few weeks in Donbass, which is now looking certain, and if the bad economic news in the West increases, which is inevitable, then I'm afraid the danger is that these people will say, look, we've got to end this. We've got to find some reason to end this. And we've got some way to end this and to achieve victory. And the way we do that is we impose a no-fly zone or something of that nature. So at that point, I'm afraid we are in a situation which is unprecedented. We've never been in since the end of the Second World War. It's not at all clear what the Pentagon would do if it was confronted with those kind of demands. My impression is that they're pushing back very hard against them, but would they really resist an instruction from the president if they got it? I mean, that would be an extraordinary situation, and then we are in an incredibly dangerous position. So, and I don't know to what extent this is understood in Moscow. I'm not sure. I think there are some people in Moscow who understand it. I think Lavrov, who has to negotiate with these people all the time, understands that. I think Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, understands that. I'm afraid there are some people around Putin who probably don't understand it. His press spokesman, Peskov, whom we were talking about before, he's still trying to sound reasonable. He's still trying to say, well, we've got all these very measured and moderate projects in Ukraine. Let's see whether we can find some satisfactory compromise which will all enable us to get back together again. I mean, it seems to me, doesn't understand it. And the big question is, does Putin?
Well, yeah, I mean, someone like Peskov is definitely looking for some sort of rapprochement with Europe, which is absolutely crazy to think that he still believes there's something to be saved in that relationship. But the statements that he's been making, especially to the media in the UK, definitely signal that. Someone like Lavrov is a much more of a realist, and I think Lavrov sees the situation for what it is, and I think he is concerned with this. And my question to you is,
I think, by the way, I think so are the military. By the way, I think the military are probably pushing at the bit, and of course, you mentioned the fact that they've been escalating their missile strikes. I mean, they made that demonstration with their hypersonic missiles. They attacked that base near Lviv a couple of weeks ago and killed all those mercenaries. They're probably signaling that they're able to in fact, they've said as much, that they can, in fact, intercept these arms supplies. And I think probably that's where, of course, the counter pressures would come within Moscow, that they would be saying that we just can't allow the situation to continue in this way. We've got to take a firm stand. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I'm going to say now is maybe controversial, but let me see how I can phrase it here. We know what how the media has painted Putin as the next Hitler, and he's authoritarian and dictator. But everyone that watches this channel and me and you know that Putin actually has a much different reputation inside of Russia. He's actually seen much more as a moderate figure. I'm not saying he's liberal, but he's definitely seen as someone more in the center and more moderate. Maybe over the years he's gotten a little more stiffer, let's say, over the years, but he's still seen as someone who's very much on the moderate side of things. Do you believe that knowing the original plan was to go in soft, to use maneuver warfare, like Scott Ritter said, but to go in soft, to try and capture Ukraine without having a lot of civilian casualties and infrastructure damage? Do you think that the military around Putin is starting to say, look, given the situation right now with regards to the neocons and the escalation that they want and the all-out war that they want and the all-out war that the media is pushing for, and they are pushing for all-out war, we need to become a lot harder. We need to send a much stronger signal, especially with regards to the west of Ukraine, where we're seeing a planned escalation that is taking place. That's how it seems to me, that the west is where the escalation is going to be with regards to heavy weaponry and things like this. Do you think Putin is just too soft? And do you think if he doesn't harden up the pace of things, that the public in Russia will start to say Putin is just not hard enough or strong enough. It sounds weird for me to say it, given the audience that we're speaking to, say a Western type of audience. They're going to probably hear this and they're going to say Alex has gone crazy. But there is that talk inside of Russia where they feel that Putin is not as strong with regards to these things as other people in Russia, other leaders in Russia would be. I mean, do you understand how I'm trying to frame this?
I understand you completely.
While still trying to be sensitive to the war, to human life. I mean, to all these things. It's a sensitive situation,
yes.
but
yes.
we are trying to talk about this in a constructive and realistic way as well as we analyze the situation.
You are absolutely right about this. And can I just say, and I think this is one of the great problems. I think people do not understand because, of course, the way in which Putin has become the overwhelming focus of media commentary in the West. Everything is supposed to revolve around him. I think that this has created enormous misunderstandings about the nature of Russian politics and of Russian society. If you spend any time, as I do, going onto the Russian, onto the Russian media, following the Russian media, and by the way, I can only partially access Russian social media, but I understand it's even more vigorous. What you will find, and this goes back, way back, is that Putin in Russia, by most of Russian society, is seen as a moderate with respect to the West. I mean, you remember how for a long, long time he used to refer to Western countries as our partners. It's difficult to convey to Westerners how much that grated with Russians. I mean, it really did. I mean, it really annoyed people. If there's ever going to be a challenge to Putin, it's not going to come from the liberals, who are a discredited and isolated and marginal force within Russia. It is going to come from that patriotic wing of Russian society, not wing, but, that large force within the Russian society, which extends all the way from the Communist Party on the left, which is not like the Communist Party of the old days, all the way to people who I would unhesitatingly describe as right, and, pretty right, pretty far right. So he is increasingly looking as if he is too moderate in their eyes. And that, of course, is a real danger. If he's able to bring this thing through, if he's able to bring everything together and win that, achieve a political outcome in Ukraine, there's no doubt at all it will consolidate Russian society even further behind him. It is consolidated at the moment. But with that consolidation comes expectations that he will see this thing through. And I think that's something that, I'm not sure to what extent he understands it. Because, of course, I don't know what goes on within the Kremlin, what kind of discussions take place there. But, I presume that Putin is well enough informed to know what sentiment in Russia is. That, the mood in Russia at the moment is completely uncompromising. Now, I just wanted to say that yesterday, our very good friend, Gonzalo Lira, provided us with a link to an article by a Russian journalist, which specifically focused on sentiment within the Russian elite. This is not, the general population, which has always been increasing and has become increasingly anti-Western. It's the elite, that part of Russian society, which up to now has been most prepared to accommodate itself to the West. And even amongst that segment, opposition to the West, hostility to the West, has hardened by exponential levels over the last few weeks and months. So I do hope that Putin is informed about all of this. At least I hope. I say I hope. I mean, I presume that he's informed about this because, of course, if he isn't, if he starts making compromises which Russian society does not accept as satisfactory, then of course he will find himself undoubtedly in a very difficult political position. And then he will be displaced by somebody much harder than himself. By the way, I have to say this. I mean, I thought Peskov, who I've never thought of much of as a press spokesman, I pay little attention to what he says. Lavrov, the foreign minister, who I think is much more authoritative figure, gave a very, very interesting comment, and he discussed the state of the negotiations with Ukraine and pointed out that it was the Ukrainians who made all the big concessions last week, but he's now made a further comment about the Ukrainians backtracking on some of those concessions under Western pressure, and he's also made it fairly clear that if there is ever a deal done with Ukraine, with the current Ukrainian government, then the Russians will insist on its enforcement. And that implies, and Lavrov's words were not difficult to pass here, that the Russian army is going to stay in Ukraine for a very, very long time, beyond Donbass. So I think that's what Lavrov expects. I think that's certainly what the military expects. I think it's also the view of Russian society in general. But you do get some people in the Kremlin who are seen by Russian society as being altogether too soft on this issue. And I think that view is gaining hold. But, to come back to our original point, I am sure that the military and the foreign ministry people and the people in the intelligence services and all of those are telling Putin, look, you wanted us to go in very soft into Ukraine. We did. It didn't perhaps achieve quite the effects that you expected. The Ukrainians didn't rush to make peace. On the contrary, they're still fighting. Given that is so, we have to harden up.
Yeah. And I think another question that a lot of people are asking, especially inside of Russia, is how are we going all in? I'm hearing a lot of Russians that are kind of expressing this. Are we going all in? And I don't mean in the terms of taking all of Ukraine or not. I'm saying, are we fully committed to getting this done and to taking on, not Ukraine, to taking on the EU and the US, and I'm throwing in here also the economic war and all this, and for example, gas. Everyone is always asking, why doesn't Putin just turn off the taps? You know what I mean? It's a simplistic way of saying it.
I know,
but it's that kind of all you're hearing because the West controls the media war. They absolutely control the media war, no doubt about it. All you're getting is it appears they keep on hitting Russia and hitting Russia, sanctions after sanctions after sanctions, after weapons coming in from here and from there, and Slovakia's giving S-300s, and Germany's thinking about giving tanks, and Putin's a thug, and Putin's a dictator, and the Russians are hearing this, and they're saying, okay, it looks like the West is definitely all in, and they may even go for a no-fly zone. Hell, the media is even talking about nuclear war. They're even trying to soften up the effects of nuclear war. Are we willing to go all in as well? And I think that's where you're getting the frustration from, and I'm always speaking from the Russian side of things because everyone knows what the Western side of things are. You're getting that sense of frustration because the Russian media, the different factions, the foreign ministry, the Kremlin spokesman Peskov, Zakharova, the military's media wing, they all seem to be giving very different objectives and accounts as to how things are moving or what Russia wants to accomplish. For example, you said it, Peskov is saying, let's make friends with the EU, while the ministry and the foreign ministry is saying, no, we need to accomplish our goals. Well, which one is it?
Yes. Exactly. Well, I agree with that, and I think Russian society is becoming very affected. Now, I'm going to say that there are, I think, two reasons why Putin could, appropriately play this thing in the way that he's played it, and I think this is an important thing. Two important things to understand. I think, from a Russian point of view, keeping the gas flowing to Europe for the moment does provide a stream of foreign currency, which is useful at this time. So I think that from the Russians just to turn the tap off, which I think they will start to do from the autumn, by the way. I mean, I think that, there's apparently the first set of big contracts, Gazprom contracts, expire in the autumn, and I don't believe they're going to be renewed. So we're going to start to see reductions in gas going to Europe in the autumn. But I think until that point comes, I think it's useful for the Russians to keep this thing running because, they've got changes to make to their economy, they've got to restructure, they've got to do all sorts of things. So getting that $1.1 trillion that they're going to receive in foreign currency receipts, well, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, there's no point, as we say in Britain, in cutting your nose to spite your face. I would say, in fact, and overall, that the Russians have pitched their economic responses and their counter-sanctions responses extremely well, and the stability of the Russian economy and of the currency basically say that. So, let's not criticize an economic policy and a counter-sanctions policy, which is actually working. Now, the other side of it, and about going in soft, engaging Ukraine in negotiations, doing all of these things. Now, there may be more than one explanation for it. There may be an explanation that Putin himself is soft, that he's looking for a compromise, that he's going to do what Milosevic did in Serbia, which is make an agreement, which he was there was no real reason for him to make when he did make, at the end of the Yugoslav war, and which proved a disaster both for him personally and for Serbia, and that Putin is misguided and foolish and just doesn't understand this. Now, that's possible. And, we may all think of Putin as an extremely clever man, but, this is a complex and difficult situation. We don't know what kind of advice he's getting. It's possible that he's going to do that, and that that explains the mixed messaging. I'm going to offer what I actually think is the real reason and why they went in soft in the first place, and that is that they knew in the Kremlin that there would be a massive attempt by the Western powers to rally international opinion against Russia. And I think that they probably discussed this with China. I'm sure they did, in fact. They also discussed this with India. The Chinese and the Indians said to them, look, we understand what you're doing. We've, however, got our own diplomatic problems with the West. We don't want to impose sanctions on you. We don't want to isolate you. We quietly support you. But you've got to play this in a very measured way, because if you don't, we're going to be put in a very difficult position ourselves. And I think that initially, at least, that was what was governing a lot of Russian actions. And if I can just go to this latest vote that's happened in the UN General Assembly, the West pushed this vote to get Russia off this pointless talking shop, the Human Rights Council. Now, Russians care one way or the other way on whether they're on the Human Rights Council or not. Donald Trump actually pulled the US out of the Human Rights Council at one time. Saudi Arabia refused to take its seat in it. So, I mean, you've got that history. It's just a talking shop, basically. But it was basically an attempt to work out what the state of world opinion on this war was. And it's clear that overall support for the Western powers is declining. 140 states voted against, to criticize Russia about a couple of weeks ago. It's now fallen to 97. The number of states that either voted against this resolution or abstained was in the mid-80s. And all the big countries...
99, I've got the exact number, sorry.
99.
The countries that abstained or voted against or were not present was 99.
Present, exactly.
Compared to 93 that voted for.
So there you go. And it was all the big countries. China voted against, Indonesia abstained, India abstained, all sorts of countries which might have been expected to line up behind the West abstained. So this diplomatic strategy is working, but of course it's coming with the cost of, you go in soft, you engage in negotiations, you do all of these things, and that gives difficult messaging in Russia itself. And it is having an effect, undoubtedly it's having an effect on Russian morale. There is this sense that, we need to be even harder than we are being. Now, I suspect that as this war goes on, the Russians will harden in what they're doing. And I suspect also what we're going to see is that with various countries already making their feelings about this increasingly clear, we will start to see that diplomatic support for Russia harden as well, to the point where it becomes possible for the Russians to take these harder stances in terms of the military conduct of the war. Anyway, that is why I think they went in soft. I don't personally buy this view that they didn't have good intelligence about, within Ukraine. I think that they knew perfectly well that this is going to be a complex operation. And I think the way they conducted it shows it. But the Russians pursued a diplomatic strategy alongside a military one, alongside a political one, alongside an economic one. The one thing that Peskov did say in that interview, which I thought was interesting and indicative, the one point that he said, which is I thought a good